This man has been operating an unauthorized gathering in direct violation of Oak Creek Estate's community standards. I warned him repeatedly. I gave him multiple notices, and he ignored every single one of them. He also deliberately excluded me from this event. Homeowners Association. President Margaret Vance showed up at the front door of 42 Elmbridge Court and told the homeowner that private residential gatherings were strictly prohibited. She claimed a $5,000 fine had been placed against his deed for proceeding with party preparations without board authorization. The only way she would consider withdrawing the fine was if he provided her with a personal VIP invitation. She demanded reserved seating, a dedicated host, and treatment she described as befitting her high position in the community. She said it as if it were a completely reasonable administrative request. What she didn't know was that the homeowner had been recording every conversation since her first threat. He also knew the HOA handbook contained absolutely no prohibition on residential gatherings of any kind. She had no idea that the false police report she was about to file was going to become a criminal matter, and that the restraining order being prepared against her would be the most public ending to an HOA presidency Travis County had ever witnessed. Nathaniel Hayes, a 37-year-old marketing director for a mid-sized retail brand based out of Austin, had lived at 42 Elmbridge Court in the Oak Creek Estates subdivision of Round Rock, Texas, for 3 years. Oak Creek Estates, set in Travis County, was a middle-class neighborhood of brick-front homes and tree-lined streets. It was the kind of community where weekend barbecues and front porch conversations were part of the fabric of the place. Nate had bought his home after years of apartment living. He had spent his first 2 years getting to know his neighbors well enough to consider most of them genuine friends. He was sociable, highly organized, and always did things by the book. He had been planning the party for 6 weeks. It was a milestone birthday celebration for his closest friends and neighbors, fully catered with a playlist he had curated himself and a back patio he had beautifully strung with lights. Before sending a single invitation, he did what any responsible homeowner would do. He walked to the Oak Creek Estates HOA office on Sycamore Avenue to ask whether there were any community guidelines he needed to follow for a private gathering. The woman behind the desk was Margaret Vance, at 55 years old. She had been the HOA president of Oak Creek Estates for 8 consecutive years. She had developed a notorious reputation among residents for finding problems where none existed. Her solutions always seemed to benefit her personally. She told Nate that private parties were prohibited in Oak Creek Estates. She claimed it was a community standard designed to protect residents from noise and disruption. She warned him that he would need to cancel his plans or face formal enforcement action. Nate politely thanked her, went home, and immediately pulled out the Oak Creek Estates HOA handbook that had been in his files since closing day. He read every single page that evening. There was no prohibition on private residential gatherings anywhere in the entire document. Not a clause, not a footnote, not a single sentence. He confidently ordered the catering the following morning. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe a homeowner has every right to host a party in their own home, hit that like and subscribe button. Margaret did not take the news that Nate was continuing his preparations quietly. She showed up at 42 Elmbridge Court 3 days after their first conversation and aggressively handed him a formal violation notice. The notice cited his party preparations as a community disturbance under what she called residential conduct standards. The initial fine was a staggering $1,200. Nate photographed the notice and opened the HOA handbook to the table of contents. He spent 10 minutes confirming once again that no such standard existed anywhere in the document. He put the ridiculous notice in a folder and went back to finalizing his guest list. The second notice arrived just 4 days later. This one cited the string lights he had hung on his back patio as an unapproved exterior modification under Section 3.5 of the Architectural Guidelines. Nate pulled up Section 3.5 and found it only covered permanent structural additions. String lights on a patio for a single weekend event were clearly not a permanent structural addition by any reasonable reading of that language. He casually added the second notice to his growing folder of evidence. Margaret came to his door a third time the following week, and this time she dropped the administrative language entirely. She told Nate directly that she had the absolute authority to have his event shut down by law enforcement. She stated that the only way she would stand down was if he gave her what she called a proper personal invitation. She described what that meant in very specific, demanding terms. She wanted reserved parking at the front of his driveway. She also demanded a dedicated seat at the best table, personal acknowledgement from Nate throughout the evening, and a lavish gift bag prepared specifically for her. She said it with the expectation of someone offering a reasonable deal. Nate looked at her in silence for a long moment. Then, he calmly told her he would think about it and closed his front door. He immediately called his attorney and described the bizarre conversation in full detail. His attorney told him to document absolutely everything going forward. Every interaction, every notice, every word. He warned that what Margaret had just described constituted an abuse of HOA authority that crossed into criminal extortion territory. Nate started recording every interaction from that day forward. He absolutely did not send Margaret an invitation of any kind. As expected, the fabricated fines kept coming relentlessly through the following 2 weeks. He received a noise pre-violation issued before the party had even taken place, and a parking notice for vehicles belonging to his caterers who were making a single delivery. Then came a threatening letter on official HOA letterhead. The letter warned that law enforcement would be contacted on the night of the event if the gathering proceeded without board authorization. The accumulated fines against his deed had now reached a completely absurd $5,000. Margaret had even begun referencing lien proceedings against his house in her most recent correspondence. Nate paid nothing, canceled nothing, and uninvited nobody. He confidently confirmed his catering order and finalized the playlist. He sent a follow-up message to his guests with the start time and parking details. He also installed 2 additional outdoor cameras covering his driveway and the street in front of his property. He wanted a clear video record of everything. He wasn't worried about the party itself, but he wanted evidence of anything that happened outside his home on the night Margaret had promised to send the police. His neighbors on both sides of Elmbridge Court had been invited to the party. 3 neighbors across the street had also been invited. The only person on the entire block who had not received an invitation was Margaret Vance. And she had spent 2 miserable weeks making sure Nate understood exactly how she felt about that. The night of the party finally arrived on a crisp Saturday in October. Nate's home was beautifully lit up, the music was at a polite, neighborly volume, and 40 guests were enjoying themselves in the back garden and on the patio. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then, the police arrived. 2 Travis County police officers pulled up to 42 Elmbridge Court at 9:47 p.m. Nate saw the cruiser's headlights from the back patio and walked around to the front. He wanted to meet them before they even knocked. He was calm, unhurried, and had been expecting this exact moment since Margaret made her threat. He introduced himself at the door, stated he was the homeowner, and invited them in. The officers explained that they had received an urgent call reporting suspicious activities and severe noise violations at the address. Nate just smiled, nodded, opened the door wider, and politely gestured for them to look around the property. They walked through the house, stepped out onto the back patio, and looked at 40 people casually eating, talking, and listening to music. It was at a volume the neighbors on both sides had not once complained about. The officers looked at each other. One officer checked the decibel reading on his department device. It came in well below the Travis County noise ordinance threshold. The other officer walked the perimeter of the property and found nothing that constituted a violation of any kind. They were back at the front door within 12 minutes. Nate handed the senior officer a printed copy of the Oak Creek Estates HOA handbook, open to the table of contents. He asked him to identify any section prohibiting private gatherings. The officer looked at it for a moment, saw nothing, and handed it back without comment. Nate then pulled out his phone and showed him the clear audio recordings of Margaret demanding a special VIP invitation as a condition for allowing the party. The officer's expression did not change, but he wrote something in his official notepad that took much longer than a single sentence to write. The officers thanked Nate, returned to their cruiser, and drove away from the house at 10:01 p.m. The party continued without interruption for another 2 hours. Across the street, Margaret Vance had been watching furiously from her front window since the cruiser first arrived. She watched it leave without making a single arrest. She watched Nate's patio lights stay on. She watched his guests continue laughing, and she heard the pleasant music keep playing. She understood in that bitter moment that her malicious plan had completely failed. Nate was already drafting the restraining order application with his lawyer before the last guest even left. He filed the application with the Travis County District Court the very next Monday morning. It was an airtight, devastating legal case. His attorney submitted it with a comprehensive supporting package. It included every fake violation notice Margaret had issued, the recordings of her extortion attempts, and the documented timeline connecting each fine to his refusal to comply. It also included the official police report from the night of the party, confirming that sworn officers had found no violation of any kind at 42 Elmbridge Court. The court reviewed the compelling application and granted the restraining order within the week. Margaret Vance was formally prohibited from contacting Nate, approaching his property, or communicating with him through any channel, including official HOA correspondence. The false police report she filed quickly became a separate, serious matter. Filing a knowingly false report with law enforcement is a severe misdemeanor under Texas Penal Code 37.08. The responding officers had already noted in their incident report that the 911 call did not match the peaceful conditions found at the address. The Travis County District Attorney's Office reviewed the police report and immediately opened a formal criminal inquiry into her filing. Margaret's personal attorney strongly advised her to stop making public statements immediately. The Oak Creek Estates HOA board panicked. They called an emergency meeting just 3 days after the restraining order was granted and unanimously removed Margaret from the presidency. They commissioned a full, independent review of her actions. They reviewed every enforcement action she had taken during her 8-year tenure. They found a shocking pattern of fabricated violations issued against residents who had declined her personal requests or challenged her absolute authority publicly. Empowered by Nate's victory, 4 other residents filed their own legal complaints in the months that followed. The $5,000 in bogus fines Margaret had accumulated against Nate's deed were immediately declared unenforceable and dismissed in full. She was also court-ordered to pay his expensive legal fees. The financial and legal consequences of everything she had maliciously set in motion over a simple party invitation drained her resources much faster than she had ever prepared for. Nathaniel Hayes hosted another massive milestone party at 42 Elmbridge Court the following summer. It was the same patio, the same string lights, and the same great music. He did not ask anyone's permission, and he had a fantastic time. And he certainly did not send a special VIP invitation to anyone who had not earned one. If this story reminded you of the best response to someone who tries to use a tiny bit of power as a personal bargaining chip, you know what to do. Document absolutely everything and let the courts handle the rest. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have ever been threatened, fined, or pressured by an out-of-control HOA president, we want to hear from you. Drop your own HOA nightmare story in the comments below. We are always listening and reading. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you on the next exciting episode right here on HOA Unhinged.